Good morning. The Power and the Glory, Part 2, Chapter 4, Part 3, Chapter 1. Our priest has been released by the lieutenant, and he is now attempting to wander to freedom to get out of the country. And he comes to, of all places, the house that's on the banana plantation where Captain Fellows, his wife Trixie, and Coral lived, but there's nobody there. He's starving, he hasn't eaten in days, and there's nothing for him anywhere. He doesn't know what time it is. He's hoping to see Coral, the only person who can help him without endangering herself because she's a child. He knows he's got to get over the mountains before the rains come. If he doesn't, he'll be trapped in this country. But he doesn't know where he's going to get shelter or food. And here's a dog. It's a mongrel dog who hasn't eaten either in days. She has hope, he thinks. Hope is an instinct only the reasoning human mind can kill. An animal never knew despair. Apparently he's feeling despair. And she begins to howl, this dog does. And he knows what it meant. There's a bone with some meat on it, and he is about to compete with this dog for the one morsel of food that there is. And he knows this dog wants the old world back when the people were around, but they're not around anymore. Everything is removed from the room except what's useless or broken. Apparently, the Fellows family has left. We don't know why. He's in possession, he feels. He's the human, and he's the master of the dog. He goes into Coral's bedroom, where he goes into Captain Fellows' bedroom. He sees a lot of bottles of medicine on the table and thinks somebody must be very ill. Well, that would be Trixie, Coral's mother, the hypochondriac. Goes into the living room, goes into the child's room, Coral's room, turns over the contents of a waste paper basket. It's like clearing up after a death. But what's happened to the Fellows family? And he remembers Coral, her readiness to swear enmity against anybody who would hurt him. The loyalty of a child. Shuts the door. Goes into the kitchen, and there's the meat bone, and he and the dog look at it, and they are in competition. He says it's like hate on a deathbed. And he's furious. Swears at the dog because he's starving. Has no pity for the dog. He's going to fight the dog for this bone with some meat on it. This bone has been left for the dog by the people. And he thinks that the Coral, the child, would have done this. The father, who was kind of stupid, probably wouldn't have done it. And the mother's sick. So it must have been Coral. Takes the meat bone, hits the dog on the muzzle, lightly. The food tastes wonderful. He hasn't eaten in days. And then he feels pity for the dog. So he decides that he will eat the meat off the bone and leave the bone for the dog. His meal is over. He goes through the rooms. He doesn't understand where this family has gone. And he sees a book. He hasn't seen a book in months because books are outlawed. And he thinks that maybe if he can cross the mountains in this season, life can be enjoyed again. But there's no life here on this banana plantation. And then there's a buzzard, the death birds. Death is always around in this book. And he finds this book of poetry, and he reads a little bit of it. And it makes him remember his daughter, Brigida, and he cries out, "My daughter, oh my daughter," and then he walks on. He's in a region of abandonment. Abandonment's part of this novel. The church has abandoned these people. The priest has abandoned the church. He's not good enough. He's not bad enough. He doesn't feel he scores well on the martyr report card. He comes to an abandoned village of huts. Thunder and lightning are happening. Rain is about to come. Remember in the film, in movies, when you hear thunder and there's a storm, that means trouble's coming. Goes to the first hut, nobody. Second hut, nobody. The rain starts to come down like machine gun bullets. He's been walking all day and he's really exhausted. He needs some human company. There doesn't seem to be any. And then he meets an old woman who's holding a 3-year-old child. The 3-year-old child is bloody and dying. And he doesn't understand what had happened to the people in the village. Well, there's a lot of abandonment. And he thinks something valuable is there, but when he sees the child, he realizes that's what's there. He asks the woman in Spanish, what happened? And she says, Americano. Don't forget that there's a gringo, an American, wandering around with a gun somewhere out there in the countryside. She doesn't understand him. He tries to take his shirt off and tear it into strips to make bandages for the child. And he says, don't be afraid, I am a priest. At this word, she understands this. She grabs his hand and kisses it. And the child's eyes open. It's almost like the presence of a priest has revived the wounded child. And she calls him Father. He goes to his knees and he prays. He doesn't feel there's any meaning in prayers. He knows that he doesn't really qualify as a true martyr. Is anybody going to hear his prayers? But the child is dead, and he knows it's going to have to be buried. The woman talks, and she says, Americano again. He tries to communicate with her. Did the American kill the child? And it was not unlikely, but she's not sure. Then she says the name of the banana station, and he thinks maybe it's that stupid Captain Fellows who shot the child. The second storm is coming, like an enemy that's trying to flatten any survivors from the first attack. The rain's coming down like a wall. And he's shivering. His malaria is kicking in. He's got 20 miles to go to the border, and the mountain paths are going to become impassable when the rains fall. All they've got to eat now are some cubes of sugar. They haven't seen anyone. The woman doesn't seem to get tired. Everything's turning into mud. They might have been the only survivors of a world which was dying out. He wonders if he's safe. He doesn't know where he is. They don't seem to be making progress. On the second day, they come to a grove of crosses. This is the first set of Christian symbols he has seen in more than 5 years. Apparently it's a cemetery. The woman goes down on her knees to pray. There's a huge wooden cross as well. He's watching the child for some kind of movement. It's dead. And the priest urges her to come on with him, but the woman doesn't stir. She stays right there, and she's going to rest there by that huge wooden cross. He knows he's got to get to shelter, and the way is very steep. He's sweating. He's incredibly thirsty. His senses are jumbled, and he doesn't know where he is. He's a little guilty for leaving the old woman. I shouldn't have left her alone like that. I have no responsibility. Again, what can you expect, he thinks, from a whiskey priest? Again, he does not view himself very well. There's nobody there. The only thing they can give the child is a lump of sugar. Maybe that's sort of a Eucharist type of thing. He's giving a lump of sugar to the child's mouth because he's a priest. His fever is returning. He's got an appalling thirst, and he's very lonely. And he feels like he's on a blank sheet of white paper walking across the landscape over 50 or 100 miles of unknown country, and that's where he is. There's nothing to see. Walks through the jungle filled with monkeys and hissing snakes, and he thinks life is retreating from him, and then he'll be alone, and he'll find his grave. And suddenly, a man comes toward him. He's carrying a rifle. The priest gives him his name for the first time in 10 years. The fever lifts. The priest is telling the man, I'm not going to bring you any trouble. I don't want to be a hostage. I don't want there to be any more hostages. He walks up out of the jungle toward a long slope of grass to a huge whitewashed building. Seeing a guy with a gun, he assumes it's a soldier's barracks. If I have been seen, I will give myself up. I assure you, no one shall get into trouble because of me. He stumbles forward into a wall of a building. Again, he thinks it's a barracks. It's a church. Sits down on the rain-drenched grass, leans his head against the wall, falls asleep, and dreams cheerful dreams. He's made it out of Mexico into another country where there are churches and religion has not been outlawed. Next question, what's he going to do now that he's gotten there? We'll see when we read chapters 2 to the end of the novel, which will be the climax.